Welcome to the third Photography Therapy podcast with Brian. Could you please give us an introduction of who you are and what your background in photography is, please?
Sure, yeah. I started developing an interest in photography when I was a kid, and my dad was a keen amateur photographer, and he had a Hasselblad and a Leica M6, which he had in a locked filing cabinet, which I didn't really have access to, and I was extremely sort of fascinated by these objects. And then he also had lots of photography magazines. I don't remember exactly the names, but I do remember sort of pouring through black and white documentary photography and stuff by Henri Cartier-Bresson and the like, Magnum photographers. So I developed a sort of an early interest in photography, and then it's something as a hobbyist that sort of lasted throughout my sort of teens and early 20s, it just sort of continued as one of the things. I wasn't trying to make a living out of it, but I had sort of various successful sort of competition entries and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's just been a sort of a regular fixture in my life, really, taking pictures, traveling with a camera. But I wasn't technically trained, but I did go and do an MA in photography in Brighton as a kind of treat to myself in 2015. So it's just been not necessarily a way I've earned money, although I have done some professional stuff. But just a constant fixture in my life, really, as an artistic passion, I guess you'd say.
Thank you. So you've been involved in photography pretty much all your life, as you just said now. And I've known you for years and years. And I love your documentary stuff. And can you tell me and us the transition between real life photography and AI photography? What were the elements that made you switch? What are the elements that you like? And just give us an overview of how does it work and what it is, because I'm sure there's thousands of people that they don't even know about the existence of it, and if they know about it, they don't know how to use it or what it is.
Sure, yeah. I mean, the first thing I'd say is that I haven't really switched as such. I'm still consider myself to be a photographer, and also AI photography, which some people are calling post photography, is a very new development. There was a couple of breakthrough products last year, one called DALI, which was launched by a company called OpenAI, which Elon Musk funded, and another one called Midjourney, and another one called Stable Diffusion. And what these are based on something called large language models, which was a form of AI that has enabled a form of natural language expression, so that you can express yourself in natural language, and the machine learning and AI components can understand what you're saying. So in terms of imagery, this relates to something called text to image AI, and what that means is that you can describe something that you want to see, and the AI will make its best effort to return output which relates to your expression. So I got on a wait list for DALI quite early, sort of towards the tail end of 2022, and the first prompt I did was an ice skating polar bear in the style of a Renaissance painting, and it came back with this incredible illustration of a polar bear with a kind of almost like a tutu, like a ballerina's skirt on ice skates in the style of a Renaissance painting. So, I was hooked from then. But photography at the beginning was something that was just not up to scratch. But DALI, to some extent, has got better at photography, but Midjourney is the real winner in the photography space, in my opinion. And they've gone through several iterations from the original version 1 to version 5, which is the present version now. version 5.2. And each time it just gets better and better. So the returns, if you know what you're doing in terms of the prompts that you use, are becoming more and more photorealistic. And I've just been kind of inspired to explore this new domain, and amazed by the results. Excuse me. And I've been publishing the results on Instagram, and I've actually been getting more interest than I was getting from my own personal photography, which is interesting.
And where can people find your Instagram?
My Instagram handle is Naughton, NAUGHTON.photo.
Just in case you're listening, and you are, go and follow Brian. And Brian, can you give us an example of how AI photography works and how do you generate an image?
So with Midjourney, it's all based on a rather bizarre kind of interface, which is based on a Discord server. So you have to set up an account with Midjourney. I think it's midjourney.com. And then once you've signed up, you have to also have a Discord account, which is free. So you go to their Discord server and then you type /imagine, and it brings up a kind of a prompt interface then, and you put your prompt in, and the prompt could be very simple. It could be a portrait of a cat, but as you sort of learn a bit more about the prompting environment, you can become sort of more and more technical. For example, you can use cinematic language to describe the kind of viewpoint, like and the kind of shot. So if you want like a fine art portrait, which is kind of like head and shoulders, there'll be one kind of expression, various expressions that you'll use, but you can use the kind of expressions that filmmakers might use in terms of establishing shots, whether it's wide, full length, half length, etc., close up, extreme close up. And you can also
so it uses technical terms to generate images.
And you can also use various cameras. Like I've experimented with Leica cameras quite a lot. So you could say a Leica M10 monochrome, or you could say a Leica M10R, or you could say a Hasselblad X1D, or a Sony A7R5, or anything in between. You can also specify lenses and apertures. So and you can put words in like bokeh if you want to get a certain quality to your images. It's slightly hit and miss, but the idea is that the AI knows through the training of its data set, its image set, it knows what a photo made by a Leica looks like, and it knows what a photo made by a medium format camera looks like. So it will try and approximate that based on the prompts that you provide it with.
And where does it get the information from? Is it just the internet itself, or is there like a particular way of knowing how like an M3 looks like?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert in this, but they're trained on huge data sets, and so that presumably would include lots of metadata for images, both images that have been selected by the companies that make these systems, and also images off the web, basically. And there is actually a bit of a backlash in terms of copyright, but there are some cases ongoing at the moment where certain artists have filed cases against some of these AI companies because they've been trained on their image bank without their consent, and that represents a kind of a breach of copyright. So case law hasn't been established really, but there are some interesting cases working their way through the courts at the moment. Yeah, so I kind of visualize it as being a bit similar to the kind of hip hop and music sampling revolution. That there's part of this is to do with remix culture, and part of it is to do with appropriation of other people's copyrighted work, and there needs to be some kind of balance found. I don't think that if you're describing, if you're saying an image in the style of Martin Scorsese, that should present a copyright problem. But if you're creating a derivative work which is very specifically based on an artist's original conception, then there has to be some balance struck, I think, between the existence of intellectual property and the capacity for people to be creative with these new tools. But it's it's less than a year old, so all of this stuff is still sort of up in the air.
So this was actually one of my questions. What do you think about... Alrighty, let's take a break. The Cambridge Photography Show is happening this October. If you're interested in photography, videography, or about gear, you should come and visit, because all the major brands are there, loads of photographers attending to network, great variety of talks and workshops. You got a lot to miss out, so if you're interested, just please visit CambridgePhotographyWeek.com. Once again, CambridgePhotographyWeek.com to find out more about the show, about the tickets, and what's happening. Now back to the podcast. The art belonging to the artist and so on and so forth. So this covers the question really well. I mean, yes, I agree that it has to be a certain balance, because if I'm an artist, not in case of photography, because I think it's really, really hard to claim your rights of an image. But as an artist, I think there should be a middle ground somewhere, whether it's within submitting your images wherever you submit, or, I don't know, making a case to really one of these companies. But it's, as you said, it's the beginning, so there's that much you can do about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think basically the precedent will be set by court cases, as it is in so many other areas, that once judges start ruling in individual cases, that will start to set up a precedent in terms of case law that other people can refer to. So, yeah, I've no idea how it's going to work out. And the other side of it is, I see these things very much as being tools in the same way that a camera is a tool. It's still to do with the creative impulses of the person using them. In the same way that, images made in Photoshop 15 years ago were kind of frowned upon by OG photographers. And now it's very much seen as it's understood that not all fine art photographs are completely photorealistic, and indeed, even if you go back to people like Ansel Adams, the prints that he made, there was so much that went into the print process in the darkroom that that's a creative process using tools and experience and knowledge and all the rest of it. And I think the same is true of these AI tools, that really it's still an artistic process and it's still a tool. So therefore, if you're creating things using AI tools, you should own the works that you're creating. At the moment, it's a bit of a grey area, really. I want to start monetizing my work, both as NFTs and as prints. But at the moment, it seems to be a bit of a grey area, really, in terms of whether I own the copyright to the images that I'm creating in the same way that I would do if I was making them with a camera.
I'm sure there should be ways around it. For instance, imagine if you create the image on AI, you print it out, and you take a picture of it, that becomes yours, because you're taking a picture of a picture, and automatically that is your intellectual property or whatnot.
Yeah. I think that's very true, and that's something I've thought about. I mean, the images that Midjourney produces are quite small. They're just over 1,000 pixels on the long edge. So I'm going to be using upscaling software to make them bigger. And then I've actually been thinking about returning to the analog process. So you can submit digital files to be printed using silver chemistry technology. So in other words, you can actually make an analog print from a digital file already. So that's since I'm predominantly using black and white, I think that's what I'll be doing, is making effectively analog black and white prints from the digital upscaled files that are made by AI. So there's a nice kind of circularity to that in terms of returning to more traditional processes and techniques.
Imagine if, even not 100 years, but imagine if you said this to a photographer 20 years, 10 years ago, you would have said like, in 10 years' time, we'll be producing AI generated images to then print them as 35 millimeter film. People will go berserk. What are you talking about? This doesn't exist.
Well, I mean, I think even a year ago, people
Even a
wouldn't have
year ago.
understood. I mean, it's the same as with. I mean, people are more familiar with Chat GPT in terms of what's happened with chatbots over the last year, but a similar thing has happened with what they call generative AI image tools.
Amazing. Can you show us a little example of how it works?
Sure. So this is my Midjourney account, and this is where it stores all of the images that I've created. And I mean, it's very much like looking through a series of negatives to try and find the right one. What I do is I run the prompt numerous times, so you'll get near duplicates, but some of them are more photorealistic than others when you get down into the granular detail. So it's a question of a kind of a curatorial process that you go through to find the images that you like. So let me walk through the whole process. So these were actually, I mean, I find lots of different ways of trying to get interesting images. This here is an interesting experiment. So this was version 1 of Midjourney. So this is, I'll just read out the prompt to you first, which is, hang on, yeah, I think it's at the bottom there. High contrast, black and white portrait of Albert Einstein, Rembrandt lighting, dramatic lighting, Leica M11, Sumilux 35mm f5.6, clean sharp focus, lovely bokeh, magical mood, film photography. And then this also had version 1 at the end. So this was the original. That would have been the return at the beginning of Midjourney, like in whenever it was last November or December or whenever the tool was made public. So that was version 1. That was version 2. That was version 3. That was version 4, which now looks like Einstein, but it looks like a kind of a depiction of Einstein rather than a photograph of Einstein when you look closely. Here is version 5.
Oh my God.
So, it's now
Oh my God.
very close to looking like an original portrait of Albert Einstein. And, this is all in less than a year. So I think the point really is that the improvements that these AIs are making are on an exponential kind of scale. So if you can imagine, in 12 months' time,
You'll be able to say hello to him.
it will be completely photorealistic. At the moment, the AI, interestingly, has problems with hands. So the hands will be mangled up sometimes, or you'll get 6 fingers, and it reminds me of when you go back into the history of art and you look at the Renaissance and some of these painters. They would all start learning their trade with anatomical sketches. So, for instance, you'll see lots of hands, because hands are very hard to draw. So you'll see lots of sketches of hands or of muscle definition and things like that. These are all the things that AI also needs to be trained on in exactly the same way that an artist learning their trade would be trained on. So I found that sort of very interesting, that hands are very difficult for not only for humans to draw but also for AI. And I guess we could actually go to Discord. So this is the Discord environment, and you'll see that lots of people are trying various prompts here for their.
Could we try and create an image?
Yeah. So you put in /imagine, and then the prompt comes up, and then you're away. So
What should we create? A famous person, a famous photographer.
well, I mean, it's very hit and miss with famous people, because it depends on the I tend not to go for famous people.
Okay.
It knows who Elon Musk is very well.
Of course.
It doesn't know. I've tried various different people like Gary Gensler, who's the chairman of the SEC, and there are lots of images online of him, but not enough for the AI to have got a very clear picture of who that person is. So famous people is
Do you think if we would add someone like Martin Parr or any other photographer that, or
Oh, you mean in the style of his?
in the style, and maybe him, a portrait of a photographer, as you showed us of Albert Einstein.
Well, Einstein is there'll be lots of portraits of Einstein online for it to look at. So I mean we can try, but it's an experiment that's likely not to yield.
Who's the most famous photographer that everyone knows about? Steve McCurry, Bresson, but Bresson doesn't have images of him, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think it might be a bit of a dead end.
How about Picasso?
Yeah, okay.
We try Picasso.
Okay, all right. So let's try a black and white portrait of Picasso.
In the style of...
In his studio painting. Dramatic lighting. Let's just try Leica M10R, since I know that tends to give quite nice results. And then you can add various things like the aspect ratio that you want. So then you put AR, which stands for aspect ratio, and then a space, and then you could have 16:9 or 3:4. I tend to use 3:4 for portraits, but you could have 4:3 if you wanted a landscape image. So 4:3. Let's see what that comes up with. So it submits it to the server, and then you're in a queue basically where you're time sharing the processing. This is a subscription, incidentally, which is the basic package, which I have, is about $30 a month. So it's not cheap, but on the other hand, it's a revolutionary kind of tool. So I think it's worth the money.
Look at it
So you now see the image kind of appearing, and it does 4 iterations. You'll see not all of these are black and white, so there's a coherence thing sometimes. So it becomes a very curatorial process, but you can see now it's 62% complete, and you see the image appearing like strangely in the same kind of way that you would see an image appearing in a dish in a dark room.
Yes.
It's a similar kind of like weird process of seeing it emerge. And okay, so it's finished now. So we're on a low bandwidth connection here. Normally that would be instantaneous.
Jesus Christ.
So I mean, you can see it's a likeness of Picasso, but it's not an exact.
But that looks like him.
Yeah.
Like, that really looks like him. Maybe the first image doesn't look as much, but this one.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can see here, look, his hand is all mangled up.
It is true.
Yeah, and that doesn't look like Picasso at all. So it's hit and miss. So anyway, you've said you like that one. So then what you would do is you would upscale that. It's number 2, so it's left to right, so top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you want to upscale that, you go upscale to U2, and you might also decide that you want to run. So now it's upscaled that, so that and that's a 1000 pixel image on the long edge. So perfectly usable for web. Perhaps less so for print in terms of print resolution. But and then what you could also do is you could vary this. You could say very subtle or very strong. You can zoom out by 1.5x or 2x, or a custom zoom somewhere between the two. You can turn it into a square. So there are various different functions that you can then run on the version 5.2. So this is waiting to start now. So what it will do is it will take this as the original image, and now it will create 4 derivative versions of that image that are subtly different. So say for example, if the hand wasn't perfect on that, you could run another iteration, and by the law of averages, one of the versions would have a hand that was usable or something. So here you have 4, and you'll see that actually he's wearing slightly different outfits, and the painting that he's making is slightly different, and there's a statue in the background here. The statues are different, there's no statue here. So you've got very subtly different, and also he looks slightly different in each.
I still think
Each
number
version.
2 is the best one. Like, again,
Yeah, so I mean,
that's mind blowing.
yeah, so you can see the potential anyway, and when you think that this is only going to get more and more coherent, every month until it's indistinguishable from Picasso. You wouldn't be able to know whether that was a real photo that was taken of Picasso or an AI generated one.
So where do you think this whole AI concept is going to go in the future? What do you think we'll be able to do? And how are we going to be able to use these photographs? Because I don't see, I mean, of course, there's a massive difference between being a photographer and capturing the light, and there's a massive difference between being a photographer and creating the light.
Yeah, I mean, I've been so kind of engrossed in just the process of learning and iterating and seeing what I can come up with and experimenting with light, and why I've started with black and white is because, you'll know as a photographer that you kind of, if you shoot lots of black and white, you tend to think differently about light and shade and contrast and the kind of images that you're creating. Some black and white images will work only in black and white, and some images will work only in color. So I've started with black and white as a kind of a first principles thing to try and master the art of black and white AI photography before I start getting involved in the realm of color. And I did the same with analog photography as well. So that is to say, I haven't really taken much time to reflect on the bigger picture stuff. I mean, obviously it means I did an MA in photography, and I learned a new word when I was there, which was indexicality. And this is to do with the photo being an index of something that it's representing. So in other words, if you take a picture of a vase, then the photo becomes an index of the vase. In other words, it says that this is a photo of an object in the real world that's a vase, so it's indexical of the vase. And pretty much since the beginning of photography, that's been the basic assumption, is that a photograph is a record of something that exists or existed in the real world. Now, obviously, people like Stalin airbrushed Trotsky out of images. So there's been some kind of contention about the fact that a photograph represents a real scenario in the three-dimensional world. But to all intents and purposes, the way that we use camera phones, for example, we're used to photographs being records of events or objects that exist in the real world. And I think with the dawn of this AI, we can no longer, and that's across deep fakes and all kinds of other areas, but basically that thing that has held photography in place is now dead, basically. Photographs can no longer be indicative of something that happened in the real world.
Wow. But if you think about it, that is true. Like with these tools, when you're unable to recognize whether it's a true photograph or an AI generated image, I want to tell a story about this is how I was inspired to get you on the podcast, because I know that you do AI photography, but I was never kind of hooked on it until I saw an article about, I don't know the names, I don't know who he is, where he's from, or anything, until this gentleman submitted his work for Sony Photography Awards.
Right, yeah, I saw that story too.
And he won the competition with an AI-generated photograph.
Yeah, he did some post-processing, so there was part of that was Photoshop as well, but the raw material that he used to create the image was AI generated, and he didn't accept the award. He went to collect it. I mean, on one level, it was a bit of a PR stunt, but he went to the whatever it was, the ceremony, and basically stood up and said that I created this with AI, and AI is not photography, therefore I don't accept the award. And
imagine you're going to win one of the most prestigious photography awards, because I think Sony Photography Awards are the most prestigious ones.
Yeah.
And you refuse it because it's AI generated.
Yeah. Yeah, so that kind of says it all, really, doesn't it? When AI generated images start winning photography awards, and we're less than a year in, we're less than a year in.
And cut. Thank you very much, Brian. This was amazing, honestly.
Yeah.
This was amazing, and I hope that people who will listen to this, they will get something out of it, because this is so new. Honestly, this is so new that you can't even keep up with it. Like,
Yeah, man,
last year, an image that is generated by AI wins a photography award. What's next?
Yeah, I think, from my personal perspective, I think I'm going to try and ride this wave, because I think it's such an important development that there are going to be a number of early AI artists who will be recognised in the same way that people who were early proponents of cubism, or it's a genre in its own right, and therefore people who crack it early on will become, for want of a better expression, famous artists. So
I hope so, because it's a form of art. I mean, I personally don't see this as photography, because it's not, because you're not capturing anything, but it's imagery.
Yeah.
Imagery and photography, by the end of it, in a digital world, are the same thing.
Yeah, I think the difference is the photorealism, isn't it? I've seen people sketching, you see them occasionally on Instagram, people who can sketch things, and they do the eyes so amazingly that you could barely tell the difference between it being a photorealistic eye and an eye that was drawn with the human hand. But
sometimes it just looks the same thing. And sometimes if you put them in front of you, you'd say, okay, this painting looks more of a photograph than a photograph looks of a photograph.
Yeah. So it's a similar thing, and I agree with you. It's not photography, but there's certainly a blurring of the boundaries. You're using quite a lot of the same skills, a knowledge of light and shade, of lighting, of camera angles, which lenses to use, all of that kind of stuff, potentially at least, comes into play in the same way, and it's not just going to stop with stills either. This is going to move into video, so that you could actually write a script like a director would write a script, with storyboarding and explaining the scene, and then the dialogue and all the rest of it. And I'd say probably within 10 years there'll be full-length feature films made by AI.
I'd love to see that. I would really love to see that, because you can make a movie out of anything in any style at any point.
Yeah.
With no budget, but no production budget whatsoever.
Yeah.
That would change the world. Like, it really would.
Yeah. I've already heard people say that about some of my photos. Like, to take that picture would have required makeup, someone organising a travel budget, a full itinerary. Model. Model releases, legal, all of this stuff, and basically you just clicked a button and there it is.
If you think about it, this could be so revolutionary. Like, it really could be, from every point of view.
Yeah.
From every point of view.
Yeah.
And as you said earlier, I think I completely agree that to generate an image like you do, it's not just saying black and white portrait of a lady with cool lighting in the background of. No, like an M11 or what not with the 56 millimeter 1.2.
Yeah.
Like, people don't know this. Like, the more technical you are, the better image you're gonna produce as a photographer.
Yeah, totally.
As a generator, I think.
Yeah. Yeah,
Amazing.
and you know, I'm still learning, but it's definitely a process of refining prompts. You know, they're already calling people prompt engineers. You know, it's there's a new classification of job called prompt engineer now. I mean, you have to know a Python and a few other things, but you know, there are people now earning 300 and 400 grand a year, specializing in being a prompt engineer, so that they know how to interrogate Chat GPT-4 in order to get amazing results, much better than the average user stumbling into ChatGPT would be able to get, because they know how to optimize the text that they're putting in, and they know all the tricks of the trade in order to generate the best results from the software. And I think, you know, on a smaller scale, the same is true of the image side of things. You know,
I'll definitely explore this image making, this image generating for photography as a business, because why not?
yeah,
Why not?
yeah.
Well, thank you again, Brian. This was amazing.
Pleasure, man.